Well, when I was in Kharkiv on Friday, people were saying that things had calmed down in the last week or two, since the beginning of May, when Russia launched a ground offensive in the northern part of Kharkiv region. The city itself was also coming under heavy bombardment. Since Ukraine got authorization from its Western allies to use weapons they'd supplied, at least some of them, to strike targets inside Russia, they'd managed to stabilize the situation a bit on the front lines and stop the rocket attacks on Kharkiv. But what they can't stop with the weapons that they've been allowed to use are these glide bombs, which are launched from planes. The planes take off from air bases that are beyond the range of the HIMARS, for example, which are one of the most important rocket systems that the missiles, that the Americans have allowed the Ukrainians to use. The Americans don't want them to use ATACMS, which have longer range, so they can't strike the air bases. And it was a glide bomb dropped from a plane that hit the city centre of Kharkiv yesterday. As I think you said, 3 people died and about 50 were injured. Residential buildings were damaged. There were also 3 others that hit the city, but that hit an industrial zone. And all this is happening as Ukrainians are still fighting in the north of Kharkiv region. They've made much of their successes in stabilizing the front line there, but that doesn't mean that the battle is over. The Russians are clearly still trying very hard to take, in particular, the village of Liptsi, which is pretty much due north of Kharkiv, maybe a little bit to the west, from which they would be within range to start using different kinds of artillery and other weapon systems to strike Kharkiv itself. So it's very much an ongoing battle. Although there was this terrible strike yesterday, the situation in Kharkiv city is better now than it was maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, all the same.
And what about elsewhere in eastern Ukraine then? Give us a broader picture of the situation of where we're at with Russia's offensive.
Well, the main force of the Russian offensive is still on Donetsk region, which Ukraine still holds a significant part of. The Russians, if you remember, de facto were in control of a large part of Donetsk region and Luhansk region since 2014. Now, in almost every place along the front line, they've expanded the area that they control. To the north of Donetsk, they took Avdiivka. To the south, of course, Mariupol. Earlier in the war, also Bakhmut. There was one part of the front line where they had never managed, the Russians, to move beyond where they were in 2014, basically, or early 2015, and that's the part between Gorlovka, held by the Russian side, and the city of Toretsk, held by the Ukrainian side. In the last couple of days, the Russians have started attacking on that part of the front line too, and managed to take the village of Shumi. It's a very worrying development for the Ukrainians, who had redeployed forces who were defending that part of the front line to defend what they thought were more areas of greater priority for the Russians, such as Chasiv Yar. It seems that as soon as they leave one part a little bit less well defended than it was, the Russians take advantage of that. And so now there's a strong feeling that the city of Toretsk could be the next one in the Russian sights, that they might be trying now to take that, seizing the opportunity that the Ukrainians had offered them by this redeployment.